So, yeah, I'm Gabi Steele, and Dan mentioned I work for the Washington Post. I work for the team here in New York, which is Brand Studio. So we deal with a lot of the advertising, and we work with a lot of external companies, Fortune 500 mostly, that come to us and want to purchase articles. So we create custom builds for them that live on our site. And I have this sort of designer data visualization title. Obviously, like, we're based out of DC. I would ask now, how many people are subscribers? How many people are not subscribers and read the Washington Post or have read an article? Yeah, okay, cool. And right, so you don't pay for it, but I don't know if our paywall is better than New York Times. I know you can just go incognito on them, so that's like a plus. Yeah? Okay, are you New York Times?
It means you gotta be a subscriber to get it.
Yeah, but are you there with them?
Washington Post.
Oh, Washington Post, okay. I'm not working on that, but good to know. And I am a subscriber. I get that with work. But yeah, so the Washington Post is owned by, does anybody know who owns the Washington Post? Yeah, so 2013, October 1st, Jeff Bezos bought the Post. So even though we're not necessarily proprietary, we have a really nice benefactor who helps with all the engineering kind of opportunities. And that's how I got there as this data visualization specialist. There was no data visualization specialist before me, and since I've been there hasn't been more, because it's kind of a new field. I'm going to talk a lot about the field and what it means today to be a part of it. I'm a designer originally. I started my career as a fine artist. I was painting and drawing, and then I realized I wanted to work with like other human beings. I didn't want to be in a studio by myself, which is funny because I've come full circle and now I'm doing engineering. Is pretty collaborative, but still. So I moved from that into graphic design, which was exciting, way more collaborative, but it lacked content in a big way. I felt like I was doing a lot of advertising, Coca-Cola labels, and I wasn't dealing like with really interesting stories and material, even though they call it storytelling. And it's also funny because I'm back with Brand Studio, which is advertising in a way. But I left graphic design because number one reason was I wanted to be able to build the things I was designing. And I think a lot of designers feel that way and then move into front end, and data viz was a really nice way to do that. So I graduated from Parsons School of Design in the first data visualization master's program, Master of Science. So the way that program works and the modern kind of understanding of this field is data visualization is made up of these three disciplines: graphic design, statistics, and computer science. Because this is like code and computer science tech talk, specifically we do JavaScript, like that's all you really need to know. And then from the specifically in JavaScript, it's D3.js and Node, and you kind of do Node as the back end, and then D3 has arguably become synonymous with data visualization. And that was created by Mike Bostock, or Bostock, if anybody's familiar with him. He has a ton of open source stuff on the web, and he started as a graphics editor at New York Times, and now he's gone off to do like D3 full time. So if you don't already visualize information, but you know any of this stuff, which I'm assuming a lot of people do, you can and you should. The purpose of visualization really is to find insights within data, and the modern understanding of data viz is kind of a reflection of the era of big data, which we're living in, where there's so much information. We can't possibly visualize that using static graphic design tools like Adobe Illustrator, which is really great for infographics. It would take me 100 years to sort of break out visualizations and go through all the data by hand. So programming is the way to do that. And then scrubbing the data and all of that stuff happens separately, right? And that's MongoDB comes in. So you want to have a good place to store it, obviously. And you know all these three things, or the two of them are JavaScript libraries, you're in a good spot. So back to the data visualization specialist title. Kind of an ambiguous title, and because I walk around with it, I always take time to explain that. When you're hiring a data visualization specialist, there's sort of a spectrum of people who work in this industry, whether you're on the engineering side, the data science side, front-end design. And one of the questions I get asked most is, I want to hire a data viz specialist or a data viz engineer. Can you help me write up on LinkedIn or whatever it is, the description? And I'm like, don't you know what you need on your team? And people are kind of confused by that. And the reason being, it is new, even though information has been visual for so many years. So it's good to kind of understand this. Design is one form of data viz, like totally acceptable to be a pure data visualization designer. It's hard to kind of engage with the most interesting visualizations without some front-end knowledge, the JavaScript, because you want to be able to take on mass amounts of information and program it, in seconds. So if you're going to be stuck doing Adobe and working on those programs, you're limited. And then data science is at the other end, people who don't do any design and they deal only with the analytics. So when constructing that title, if you're ever going to be hiring a team, you don't necessarily need someone who can do all of three of these things, who did a master's in data visualization, because I graduated with 7 people a few years ago. There's not that many who were trained specifically in this, but there's a lot of people who are starting to dabble in it, engaging with it. You can hire a team with designers, with front end, and with data scientists, and they can work together collaboratively. Cool. So here's a piece that I did for the United Nations, and it's like a pretty typical bar chart, but it's like JavaScript D3. It was taking a bunch of their data that they had on sub-Saharan Africa, the gender disparity gap there. And specifically, this piece is dealing with female genital mutilation in a bunch of countries. And if you look closely, the data is actually coming from all different years. And it's being compared on the same graph. Because it was such a messy data set, that was like the only way to show it, which is not ideal, and not something that the Washington Post would put out, but it kind of shows what information can do, what visualization can do for information that's lying around, like the UNDP, who's collecting really messy data all the time. This is valuable, and it's for their external audiences. A few other reasons why this is an interesting or useful visualization. At the top, you can toggle through the information, and that's just pulling from different parts of the chart, whatever, different cells. So you can see which of these countries feel that female genital mutilation should be continued, discontinued, or there's missing data, and those are demonstrated with the red and white lines, men and female opinions. You can also jump to the second list of interactivity where you can see just people's opinions on other ways that women are treated in these countries, and the gray bars disappear at that point. So it's on a loop, but that's how that's going. So this is the piece I want to start with because it's pretty typical bar chart. One thing that's really important when you're building visualizations is that you don't want to go too crazy, and I think that a lot of the time when we're talking about the modern D3 templates that are being used, a lot of them are crazy circles, stream graphs all over the place. This is perfectly acceptable, especially to like a very general audience. So has anyone ever seen this test? Circle. How many times does a small circle fit in the large circle? Have you done it before? Cool. So enough of you haven't done it, so we'll do it. How many times does a small fit in the larger? How many people think it's 5 times? 6. 7. 8. Okay, cool. So 7 times, right? Cool. So a bunch of you got it right, but not the whole room. Now let's look at a rectangle. How many times does a smaller fit in the larger? 5, 6, 7, 8. Cool. So they're the same size, which is, I could have played with this more. But the point is, we've been looking at data visualization or graphs for a really long time. Moving away from that entirely is not going to be the future, and we shouldn't necessarily be unafraid to do so, that people understand squares better. This is Edward Tufte's, so if he's a good person to look at for all of this stuff. Just like basics, if you're getting into data viz, if you're getting into design, it's not necessarily the scariest thing ever. There's tools that have been laid out for us for hundreds of years. People have been looking at bar charts like this. Don't necessarily move away from it. Do you have a question?
Yes. Can you go back 2 slides?
Sure. Here?
Yeah, this one here. For me, I would probably think about this in terms of scatter plot.
Okay.
What sort of rules do you have to decide whether whether you're doing a bar chart or a horizontal or vertical or whatever else? How do you decide that?
Okay, so that's probably the most important decision when you're visualizing information, how it's going to fit, and that's like the qualitative, quantitative question. You have to look closely at the data set you have. If you want to go back to this, I think I've skipped too far, but it's kind of helpful. For the UNDP piece, I'm dealing with qualitative information for the most part and some quantitative. So we've got the percentages of FGM, but then we also have all of this qualitative stuff. That's unstructured data, so it's like similar to Facebook posts and things like that. once you analyze all of the information that you have, you can better determine how people are going to understand it. A scatter plot isn't necessarily going to work well for this because all the different percentages will just line up randomly, and it will be harder to overlay the qualitative information. So some of it comes with practice, but most of it comes with conversations with your team, brainstorming. This is the type of information we have. We know we deal with qualitative information this way. Bars work really well for quantitative information, and going from there. Looking at the templates beforehand, D3.js is a library, so there's tons of templates available. If you go through them and examine, you want to choose something that fits your data set rather than having a data set and then throwing it into a template that may or may not be the right fit for it. It's hugely important. I don't know if that...
That's where I was trying to go was, you have guidelines saying, this sort of graphic is way too complicated for the standard reader.
Yes.
And how do you decide that?
Sorry, this sort of graphic is way too complicated for...
That's right. I mean, I can build a graphic that's so incredibly complicated.
Right.
With, multiple colors and shapes and, the locations of various sorts, arrows, everything else. So do you have a general guideline of what you think about that?
Well, knowing your audience is hugely important, and all of the pieces I'm going to show today, or as much as I can get through, are for a general audience. But when you move into like the Washington Post audience, we know what our readers can and cannot handle. We have like an A/B testing system for that, and that's based on impressions and how long people stay on the page and what they interact with. It's really good to know. This piece specifically for the UN is for not necessarily like uneducated audiences that lives on their website, but it's for uninformed audiences that may have no background in programming or dealing with interactive media, so they needed something that was as simple as possible but still toggled through and filtered in a lot of different types of information. So that is more about the audience, I think, than the information, but with data viz, like that's the most important part. And there's also tricks like horizontal bar charts. This is a vertical bar chart. A lot more beautiful than vertical bar charts a lot of the time. They're slightly harder to read, but just flipping something on its side suddenly makes things so much more qualitative, while vertically it's quantitative. And a lot of that is testing and asking, and I think something I always speak about in data viz presentations is collaboration and having a team that's diverse. And that's why with the whole data viz specialist, I think there is no such thing as a data viz specialist. I think you want a team of people who have completely different backgrounds and are now engaging with the field. Cool? Okay, cool. I'll show some more stuff. So yeah, we did this. And this is not new. I didn't come up with it, obviously, but it's just like a good way to jump in. Cool. So now I want to talk about the diversity. Actually, we'll go back 1 second. Go back 2 seconds. So just to give you an overview, data visualization specialist roles come in all shapes and sizes. This is a versatile field. Even the jobs that I've had while being in data viz are so spread out, and I just wanted to give a couple examples of totally different projects I've worked on as a data viz specialist prior to the Washington Post, while at the Washington Post. So the first piece was that piece I did with the UN. This next piece that I'm showing is something with Fusion.net that I worked on during the presidential election in 2016 with NYU, and it's a survey visualization where we're trying to get millennials to maximize their voting potential. So they go through this survey, they choose states, and the goal at the end is to have them jump off this page, not stay on the page like what Washington Post wants, but go and attack resources. So it's a totally different type of visualization, and it's actually way more open-ended because at the end, you're given all this information, but you're given links. Like the whole idea is that you leave and go out into the world and discover things, and that's a big thing that Fusion was working on at the time. And I worked with developers on this project and designers, and I was still the data viz specialist person, but this is something that would be known as like sort of a survey kind of visualization. We do a lot of these at the Post as well. The third piece that I want to show that's like also a pretty diverse example is a project I worked on with Intel. It was wearable technology. We created shape-changing garments that would pull from your Google Calendar data and change form over the course of your day, which for women in New York City is a huge problem. I come to work or I come to school, and I have 7 different meetings, and then I want to go to the gym, and then I want to go out with people, and I don't want to go home to Queens or wherever I'm living. So my clothes will change for me. So my role was to pull in that Google Calendar data as a data viz specialist. However, it was super hands-on, p-comping. There was all sorts of different Arduinos that went into this, and it's sort of still a work in progress with Intel. And again, collaboration. This team was made up of industrial engineers, fashion designers, some software engineers, and a lot of, I think that's a lot of different designers and engineers come together to create something like this. So now I'm going to move into the Washington Post segment of this talk and just show some pieces that my team in New York has done, and then some stuff that Editorial does and how we kind of are influenced by that, and give an idea of like these custom web pages that we build out and how the graphs fit into it and how you can kind of move from the like programming development side of the actual graph and how you turn it into an article basically. So this is our website right now, kind of advertising heavy, but we do all sorts of different stuff. This is where we tell stories. Storytelling, I think, is like a broad term for what happens, but the most important thing is, so these are some of the companies we work with, some of the fancier pieces we've done. The idea with the storytelling is bringing people into the visualization or the data set with a lot of context and a lot of different components, and that's basically what all of these pieces do in different ways. So the first piece I'm going to show is something I worked on with Allstate. So I'm a designer too, so we work on all the graphics and everything like that. It is lives as a web page, again, about the presidential election and what millennials think. Oops, I went too far. What millennials think about it. The visualization component of this only happens much later on. I'm not sure if it's scrolling. Anyway, so this is a web page, long form. The visualization component is a map that happens later in the page. That we did. We went out, we conducted all the data. We worked with a data analyst on how to format the survey to get the kind of answers that would relay themselves into a template that was predefined. Allstate wanted a map. So then you're kind of putting yourself in a box, but at the same time you can cater that using the survey tools and lots of different members of the team. So because we can't see the map, I'm going to move on to the next piece, which was with, oh no, it's moving now. But anyway, just so you know, this is the kind of work we produce with external audiences, working with all sorts of dev teams, and data viz comes in later on. So let's talk about this, which is a healthcare piece. We learned about data and healthcare in Lauren's presentation, but this is with Philips on value-based care hospitals, and it's influenced by a piece that our editorial team did. We always bake articles around the visualizations because it's a really good way to help our users. We bake articles around most things, but with visualizations, it's a great way to kind of bring users in and funnel them to the hardcore kind of graphs. And for this piece, like the UN, you're going to see a lot of bar charts, typical maps, things that our general audience can understand because the subject matter is kind of heavy. The healthcare subject matter was complicated enough. These are static, they're not pulling from an API, but as you hover over them, you do get more information, which is like the most successful form of visualizations, I think, that where you can see the full graph and then hover and get more and more granular information. This is pretty basic. The ones I'm going to show from Editorial are more complex, more robust, but it kind of depends on the topic. So because this is such a long web page, we're able to cut things into smaller segments. It could all have been done in one single visualization, but no, this is not how we did it here. So if you scroll a little bit lower, you'll see some maps with more quantitative information. The majority of this is quantitative, though our survey results also gave us a lot of qualitative stuff, and we ended up having to sort of narrow it down and choose this. So I'm going to move into Editorial because I don't have a ton of time. This is the inspiration for the piece before. This is something that the Editorial team did. It's all built in D3. It's about police shootings in the United States in 2016. You hit the page and you start seeing this number go up. So we're, again, funneling people in, getting them excited about the information using basic interactivity. And then as you scroll down, you get to see these boxes. So this is pulling from the database specifically, and you get to see these. It's like pretty simple design-wise, I would say. It's nothing too crazy. Each of these rectangles represents an individual that was killed. if you can toggle these rectangles using the filters above. And if you hover over any of them, it will tell you the name of the person, and it will give you further down the page more information about how old they were and exactly how the shooting happened. So I think this is like data visualization at its strongest. We're pulling from a live database. This database can be updated at any time. It's MongoDB, D3JS, and you can get information on all levels. So you see this powerful number of 923 people, but you can also look at them as individuals, which they are. As you scroll further down the page, it will give you these like live sort of boxes about, and then it tells you here, 40 do not match, and that's 4%. So just giving those numbers straight up, that's something that programmatically is not difficult, but it's piecing it all together that makes it really beautiful and really successful, and why I think the Washington Post is known for data visualization, and why I kind of got into this field of work in the first place, because you get to deal with this kind of content. This is like ideal situation. Another totally different visualization that I'm going to show is from the Rio Olympics, and this is much more imagery based. And this piece is something that we were kind of working on the idea beforehand for a while. You start scrolling down, and as you scroll, the objects on the page get smaller, and it starts to give you an idea of the visual sizing of everything that was used in the Olympics. So you start out with the ping pong bat, and you're getting out to the arenas. So I think this is really successful, but for a totally different reason. Scrolly telling, or using scrolling to tell stories, is really popular in journalism now. The New York Times and us go at it a lot. And I think it's, again, really, really successful way to show users subtly, it's that aha moment, can you believe it? What we were looking at, 2 seconds ago. And as you keep scrolling, it just keeps going further and further out. A piece like this doesn't have the same kind of time crunch as something that's in the news that happened yesterday, or a terrorist attack piece, though the idea of scrolling out and seeing something based on size is one that probably was constructed. This was started before I started the Post, but it was constructed before the Rio Olympics came out, and then finally the subject matter matched that which we wanted to create. This happens a lot in journalism, obviously, because you've got these teams of data viz and text. They're graphics editors mostly on the editorial side. They're not known as data viz specialists, but they're creating a lot of data viz, working all the time on new technologies, but they don't always have the content to feed through it. And then once something happens, they'll then match it up and stay overnight and whatever, and then it happens the next day. And a good example of that is something the New York Times did. This is from the Bastille attacks. It's not going to move because it's not Washington Post, so I didn't make it move, but whatever. But this piece, the story about this piece that I have heard, I wasn't at New York Times, but I have colleagues that are there, is that they were looking to create something that stitched together images for a while, and then when this attack happened, they did it. So if you haven't seen this piece, you can scroll along the beach and watch each segment, sort of, or each clip of as the attack was happening, where it happened, and the information below about it. So just people always ask, you're working in news, how do you manage to program everything the night before? You don't. You work on things in advance, and then you plug them in, and then there's the pieces like the police shootings and the Rio Olympics, where that's a long-standing piece that goes for months, three months about. The brand studio team, our timelines are a little bit shorter. They're 6 to 8 weeks, because it's not product, it's turnaround for clients, but and sometimes even shorter, and then that's bad news, but we can do it. So cool. You're now all going to be obsessed with data visualization, and so I just want to give you some ideas of different ways you can jump into it. D3, like I said, has become synonymous for data viz, but that doesn't mean it's the only way. Data viz is, or the programming understanding of data viz that's not infographics and not boring, is a form of creative coding. So P5 and processing sometimes make the most innovative visualizations. Things like Tableau are not cool. Obviously, they're not. It's very useful, Tableau, and you can't argue that it's not hugely influential in the modern workplace, but that's an end user tool where you're plugging in information. It's really good for people working in kind of massive corporations where they're dealing with a lot of information, but they can't necessarily see all the same insights that the other hand-coded visualizations tools allow you to. I think we're working to get to a place where those can meet in the middle, because obviously you can't hand-code the billions of cells of information that are being generated in every kind of corporation. So you go back and forth. R and Python are also places where you can do really nice internal visualizations. I think what was being shown with Flatiron Health is a lot of the internal kind of visualization stuff, those graphs that are really great for, within your team and then beyond, not necessarily what I'm showing, which is in some ways like B2C. So like the final audience, we want to tell stories with that information, but the storytelling has to happen at all levels, because even if you are telling it to someone within your company or within another kind of B2B company, you still want to tell as much of the kind of emotional and contextual background of that information as possible, and it doesn't necessarily have to be done in like an article way, the way Washington Post does it, but in the funnel format. I think that's something I would want people to take away, is that funneling people to your heavy, hardcore data set is really successful, and something we can do with development. So I think that's all, but I could take questions because I didn't show any code or anything, so nothing technical, but just about visualization, if there is any, or how to get a subscription to the Washington Post. I can help you with that too. But yeah, thank you. Should we talk after, or do you want to?
No, this is totally, this is a different.
Okay.
Okay, now if you go back to the one of their visual in terms of representation, that's always a hot political topic. They can probably get represented in multiple different ways in terms of emphasis. Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with the editorial in terms of them saying, no, this is not what we want to show, or it's,
I think the reason, right, so I think the reason why, another reason why that piece is so successful is that when you're dealing with really sensitive information, which I like doing a lot, the piece I chose to show at the beginning was about female genital mutilation in Africa. I like get mixed up whenever I say it. There's another piece I did on capital punishment. Like, these are sensitive topics, but simplifying them visually to be, or reductionism, minimalism, like the people are being shown as squares. Simple squares, and the filtering is being done in a somewhat programmatically designed kind of a way. This is not, there's no graphic images, there's no photographs, not the same way the Bastille attack piece was done. So my recommendation when dealing with highly sensitive information is to be highly sensitive and also distill it, make it as clear-cut as possible, make it about the numbers and not necessarily about the emotional aspect, because that will come in anyway once people start realizing that information. I can show you this capital punishment piece where I drew stick figures of different ways people are executed in the United States. That's even more graphic, but it's still, they're stick figures, so you can kind of like dance around it that way. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Hey, Gabi, I've been interested in data visualization for a long time. This is definitely pushing over the edge. I'm going to do a side project that has database in it.
Yeah.
So question, you mentioned 3 pillars of database, being data science, design, and front-end.
No, data science, design, it's statistics, design, and computer science, yeah.
Well, would you say, like, the percentages that you like, are you mostly one, or are you
Okay.
all?
So it really depends what job I'm working on. At the Washington Post brand studio, it's design heavy. But in general, I think computer science is the most important pillar, and I tell people that constantly because I think from a design perspective, it sounds really great to just get involved in more infographics, but you're not going to be successful without being able to handle the APIs and pull in really interesting real-time information. I think that is like the height of what's exciting. Statistics is learnable, and you can work with data scientists and data analysts to sort of handle the information. You don't need to necessarily do that, and if you do want to do that, it's a skill. So I think computer science is the most important, and you can actually make visualization successfully with, like, it's a triangle, the peak at which is design. So design is like the final step that you'd want to learn. I come from a design background, so I sort of went in, most people that I graduated from this program with and most people I work with in the field don't come from a design background and are kind of just learning bits of design as they go. I don't think it's the most necessary, but it does take things to the next level. So I would say computer science is number 1, design is number 2, and then statistics comes and goes.
Computer science as in
JavaScript. It's not deep computer science. JavaScript. Seriously, JavaScript is all you need to know. Yeah. It's great to know more. Python is good for machine learning. I mean, you can get into all sorts of different types, but yeah.
Each of these projects, maybe you can talk about how you define what your intent is by identifying what the target users, the user's technology.
So with each of the projects, just to get an idea.
You're eliciting a response from a specific target by what you're doing, getting your own art by.
Yeah.
So we don't need to hear from people who code
So the psychology, like human-centered design type thing. So, okay, so specifically for the Washington Post, obviously we're dealing with the Washington Post audience, and we do want to elicit as much of, it's about interest, it's about people, keeping people on the page for the most part, even though no one subscribes, but whatever, for subscribers, that's the point, and then sharing that information. But with some of the other projects, it's a totally different type of audience, like with the wearable technology piece, very, very different, and you are trying to get, there it's more of like, buyers, and you want people to buy into the idea. And then I've done other pieces where, like for the UN, where the goal is to just elevate a mass amount of kind of like useless data that the UN's been sitting on. So we don't necessarily have like a specific audience there, but we just want people to get out and be engaging with the idea that FGM is something that's been happening, you know, for so long and continues to happen. And how do you kind of handle that fact? And I think for the UN, when I presented that piece to them at whatever, One UN Plaza, they were taken aback and they were like, how did you even find that in that information? Because they sent me so many data files, and I was like, it was in there, and they kind of had to discuss, well, is this something we'd want to put on our site? So sometimes you are targeting one audience, but then you have a stakeholder that feels a different way. And that's like the balance, I think, corporate-wise. From an artistic perspective, the artistic world of data visualization is totally different, and maybe one that I want to explore at some point. I have a lot of colleagues that do that, where you can get crazier and be even more aggressive. Processing P5, and I wouldn't say more aggressive, but like what was being mentioned before about you're dealing with sensitive information, you don't have to be sensitive if you're an artist, because the idea is to elicit a response, to challenge the viewer, which these pieces, the goal is not necessarily to do. At times, I mean, with the police shootings piece, there is an element of challenging the user to think beyond, the same with the UN piece. So it's kind of like it's a kind of juggling match, but it's highly influenced by the benefactor. So Jeff Bezos, no, but whatever, whoever it is, that's my position right now. Cool. One more, but I don't need to. Do you want to talk?
Wants to read about generalization and then read about, I don't know, a tampon or whatever, right? And under that, but you can get that right content. You just not tell them and say, okay, we're gonna match it.
So for branded content, we don't match content. We write custom content for, like, together with the client. So they. That's different. The editorial pieces on the Washington Post are done. It's a separate team in DC that does it to my team. We're influenced by the work that they're doing, but the news is written separately. Like, you won't.
Okay, no. Once the news is written, right? Someone can come, someone on your team, like if I were for a brand, I would say, okay, well, I want the content that I or you are building together. I want it on a healthcare article.
Yeah.
Right. So I can do that, right?
No. It's like church and state. So editorial is like one end, and we write everything separately. They can't come in and be like, we want.
Even if their content is written.
Yeah.
Right? Suppose they were writing on politics. That content is already written.
Yeah, on the editorial side.
On the side, you have, say, an insurance company that wants its content.
So they don't provide the content. We write it, but by different writers. Does that make sense? Or I don't understand the question, maybe. Yeah, the actual, yeah.
To
So it's inspired by, but not exactly. Not sure. We can chat offline. I don't know how to properly answer this question. But I appreciate you asking, and I'm thinking about it. But yeah, cool.
One quick selfish question. What do you use to do the screen caps?
To do the, these are like they're QuickTime screen captures. I use Giphy a lot of the time for GIFs, but this is like an older, I knew I was doing this presentation a few days ago, so yeah, but yeah, I find the screen capture is really good for not having to deal with web, and I talk in a lot of places that it takes time to get on the internet, whatever. So yeah, that works, but it doesn't work amazingly well. Like this is a 1 gigabyte presentation, so. Sorry about that, yeah. Cool, thanks.